everyone, welcome to today's episode, where we're going to talk about a topic that almost everyone can relate to: stress at work. My name is Sophia, and I'm here with my co-host, Mason. Together, we'll explore what causes stress at work and how to manage it. Mason, why don't you say hi?
Hey there, I'm Mason, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation because work stress is something we all experience, but don't always know how to handle. It's such an important topic, and we're going to break it down in a way that's easy to understand, but also practical for real life.
Exactly. So let's start with this simple question. What is stress at work? Well, stress at work is when you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or unable to cope with the demands of your job. It can come from many different things, like deadlines, heavy workloads, or even conflict with colleagues. And it's not just about having too much to do. It's also about how we feel about the work we have to do. You know, sometimes we feel stressed even when things seem manageable, right?
That's so true. Stress isn't just about the workload. Sometimes it's about pressure. You could have a normal amount of tasks but still feel stressed if there's too much pressure to perform well. Like, maybe your boss is always watching, or you feel like you're going to make a mistake. That can really get to you, even if the work itself isn't that hard.
Yes, and it's not always about the tasks themselves. It's also how those tasks make us feel. When we think about stress at work, we often focus on things like deadlines or difficult tasks, but stress can also come from the environment. For example, have you ever been in a workplace that just feels tense? You walk in, and everyone is quiet, maybe even a little grumpy, and it just makes the whole day feel harder.
Oh, definitely. The atmosphere in the workplace can make a huge difference. If everyone is on edge, it spreads like wildfire. And even if you're having an okay day, you start to feel that tension too. It's like you're picking up on other people's stress. So, managing your own stress isn't just about you, it's also about the people around you.
That's such a good point. Stress can be contagious. If one person is feeling anxious or overwhelmed, it can easily spread to others. And it's not just emotions, right? Stress affects your body too. When you're stressed, your heart rate goes up. You might feel sweaty, and it's harder to concentrate. Sometimes people even get headaches or stomach problems from stress. Have you ever had that happen?
Oh, for sure. I remember a time when I was working on this huge project, and the deadline was so tight. My body was just reacting, you know? I couldn't sleep, my back was always sore, and I had this constant headache. It was like my body was telling me, hey, you need to slow down, but I felt like I couldn't because the work just kept coming.
Yes, and that's what's tricky about work stress. It's not always something you can easily fix. A lot of times, we feel like we have to just keep going, even when our bodies or minds are telling us to slow down. And the more we push through, the worse it gets. You start feeling exhausted, and then the smallest tasks feel impossible. That's when burnout happens.
Right, burnout. That's when you're just completely drained emotionally, physically, mentally. It's like you have nothing left to give, but the work doesn't stop. And the scary thing is, burnout can happen gradually. You might not notice it at first because you're so focused on just getting things done. But over time, it builds up until you hit a wall.
Exactly. It's like slowly pouring water into a glass until it overflows. And what's worse is, a lot of people don't even realize they're burning out until it's too late. They just keep going, thinking it'll get better, but the stress keeps piling on. So it's really important to pay attention to the signs early on, like feeling more tired than usual, losing motivation, or even feeling more irritable with your coworkers.
Yeah, those are huge warning signs. I think a lot of people don't realize that stress can affect your relationships at work too. Like, when you're stressed, you're more likely to snap at people or get into conflicts, even if that's not normally how you act. And that just makes everything worse because then you have to deal with the stress of those conflicts on top of everything else.
Definitely. And it's not just about conflicts either. When you're stressed, you're less productive. You might spend more time worrying about how much work you have to do instead of actually doing it. So, stress doesn't just affect your health or your mood, it affects your performance too.
And that creates a cycle, right? Because when you're less productive, you fall behind, and then that creates more stress. It can feel like a never-ending loop, but I think it's important to remember that there are ways to break out of that cycle.
Absolutely. The first step is recognizing that stress is a normal part of work, but it doesn't have to control you. Everyone experiences stress, but how we deal with it makes the difference. That's why it's so important to talk about it openly and figure out ways to manage it.
Yeah, exactly. Managing stress is key. And one of the first things you can do is actually acknowledge that you're feeling stressed. I think a lot of people try to ignore it, or they think it's just part of the job, so they push through. But if you don't recognize it, how can you deal with it?
Right? Ignoring stress never works long term. So, once you've acknowledged it, the next step is to figure out what's causing it. Is it your workload? Is it a specific project? Maybe it's something more subtle, like the work environment or even how you're feeling outside of work. Because let's face it, personal life and work life often affect each other.
That's so true. Sometimes stress from outside work can make everything at the office feel worse. Maybe you didn't sleep well, or you're dealing with something personal, and suddenly even small tasks feel overwhelming. It's important to recognize those connections because stress doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. We're not robots. Our emotions and experiences all feed into each other. So, one way to manage stress at work is to make sure you're taking care of yourself outside of work, too. You know, like getting enough sleep, eating well, and finding time to relax. It might sound basic, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, self-care is really important, and it's not just about eating healthy or exercising, though those are great. It's also about setting boundaries. I mean, how many people bring work home with them? Even if you're not physically bringing your laptop home, you're thinking about that meeting or that deadline, and it's hard to switch off.
Oh, that's a big one. It's so easy to let work bleed into your personal time, especially now that a lot of people are working remotely or checking emails after hours. It's like work never stops, but if you don't set some clear boundaries, you'll always be on, and that just adds to the stress.
Exactly. And setting boundaries doesn't have to mean something drastic like never answering an email after 5 p.m. It can be as simple as giving yourself time to unwind after work. Maybe that's going for a walk, reading, or just doing something you enjoy that helps you disconnect.
Yes, finding those little moments of peace throughout the day is so important. And another way to reduce stress at work is to get organized. I don't know about you, Mason, but when my desk is a mess, I feel like my brain is a mess too.
Totally. Clutter can actually add to your stress. It's hard to focus when you're surrounded by piles of papers or scattered files. Taking a few minutes at the beginning or end of your day to organize your space can really clear your mind, too. It's like you're creating order out of chaos.
And that feeling of order helps you feel more in control, which is huge when it comes to stress. A lot of work stress comes from feeling like you don't have control over your situation, too many tasks, not enough time. But when you take small steps to organize your space, your time, or even just your thoughts, it can make a big difference.
Absolutely. I find that when I'm organized, it's easier to prioritize my tasks, too. Instead of feeling like I have to do everything at once, I can focus on one thing at a time. And that's another important way to manage stress, learning how to prioritize.
Yes, prioritizing is such a game changer. Not everything on your to-do list is urgent, and it's okay to put some things off if they aren't high priority. Sometimes we stress ourselves out by thinking everything needs to be done right now, but that's rarely the case.
Exactly. And part of prioritizing is also learning to say no when you need to. I think a lot of people are afraid to say no because they don't want to seem unhelpful or lazy, but saying no when your plate is full is actually a way of protecting yourself from burning out.
Totally. Setting boundaries with your workload is just as important as setting boundaries with your time. If you're always saying yes to everything, you'll end up overwhelmed and stressed. And let's be real, you can't give your best if you're stretched too thin.
Right? And it's important to remember that saying no doesn't make you a bad employee. In fact, it shows that you're aware of your limits and that you want to do your best work, which is way better than doing a lot of things poorly because you're overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's about quality over quantity. And speaking of doing your best work, I think another thing that helps with stress is learning how to ask for help when you need it. A lot of people feel like they have to do everything on their own, but that just adds to the pressure.
Yes, asking for help is so important. No one can do everything by themselves, and it's okay to lean on your coworkers or your boss if you're feeling overwhelmed. It doesn't mean you're not capable, it just means you're being smart about how you manage your workload.
Right, and that's something we all need to remember. It's okay to ask for support. Sometimes just talking about what's stressing you out can make a huge difference. Whether it's asking for advice from a colleague or getting guidance from your boss, reaching out for help can lighten the load.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes just talking to someone who understands can make you feel less alone in the stress. I think we often forget that everyone is dealing with their own work pressures, and it's okay to share that. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of power in sharing your experience with others. It helps you realize that you're not the only one going through it, and sometimes other people have solutions or strategies you might not have thought of. That's why having a good support system at work is so important.
Totally. And speaking of strategies, let's talk about a few practical ways to manage stress day to day. One thing I've found really helpful is taking short breaks throughout the day. When you're stressed, it's tempting to just push through and keep working, but sometimes stepping away for even 5 minutes can give you a mental reset.
Yes, taking breaks is so underrated. It's amazing how just a quick walk or even stretching at your desk can help clear your mind. I think we've all been there staring at the same screen or problem for too long, and everything starts to blur. Taking a short break helps refresh your focus.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical breaks. Mental breaks are important too. Even if you can't leave your desk, just switching to a different task for a little while can give your brain a chance to reset. It's like recharging your battery.
That's such a good point. Switching tasks can be really helpful when you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed. It's like giving your brain something else to focus on, and when you come back to the original task, you often see it with fresh eyes. Another thing that helps is practicing mindfulness. Have you ever tried that, Mason?
I have, actually. At first, I didn't really get it, but once I started practicing mindfulness, I realized how helpful it can be. It's all about being present in the moment and focusing on what's in front of you rather than letting your mind race with 100 different worries.
Exactly. Mindfulness is about slowing down and focusing on the here and now. When you're stressed at work, your mind can jump from one thought to another, worrying about deadlines, thinking about future tasks, stressing about what you didn't finish yesterday. But mindfulness helps you stay grounded and focused on what you can control right now.
Yeah, and that can make a huge difference. Instead of getting lost in all the what-ifs, you're just dealing with what's in front of you. And honestly, that makes things feel a lot more manageable. Plus, mindfulness doesn't have to take a lot of time. Even just a minute or two of deep breathing can help calm your mind.
Exactly. And it's something you can do anywhere, anytime. If you're feeling overwhelmed, just pausing, closing your eyes, and taking a few deep breaths can really help you regain your focus. It's a small thing, but it can make a big difference in how you handle stress.
Definitely. And that's the thing, stress management doesn't always have to be about big changes. Sometimes it's the small, simple actions that help the most. Whether it's taking a few deep breaths, going for a walk, or even just organizing your thoughts, these little habits can go a long way in reducing stress over time.
Right? It's all about finding what works for you. Everyone is different, so what helps me manage stress might not be the same thing that works for you. The key is to try different techniques and see what helps you feel more in control of your stress.
Exactly. And along with that, it's also important to remember that managing stress is a process. It's not something you solve once and then never deal with again. Work stress is going to come up from time to time, so it's about having tools and strategies ready to help you manage it whenever it does.
Yes, that's such a great point. Stress is a part of life, and it's especially a part of work life. But like you said, it's about having the tools to deal with it when it comes up. That way, instead of letting stress overwhelm you, you can stay in control and keep moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about staying proactive. Instead of waiting for stress to pile up until it feels like too much, you deal with it bit by bit. And like you said earlier, Sophia, everyone's different. What works for one person might not work for another. But I think the most important thing is that we're not just reacting to stress, but actively managing it before it overwhelms us.
Definitely, proactively managing stress can be a game changer. It's about recognizing your limits, using the strategies we talked about, like mindfulness, taking breaks, and setting boundaries. It's also about knowing when to ask for help, whether that's from a colleague, a friend, or even a professional if needed.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned professional help. Because sometimes work stress can become more than just feeling overwhelmed. It can start to affect your mental health in serious ways. And there's absolutely no shame in reaching out for professional support if that happens. In fact, it's one of the best things you can do for yourself.
Absolutely, mental health is just as important as physical health, and it's something we should all take seriously. If you're feeling like the stress is becoming too much to handle, reaching out to a counselor or therapist can make a big difference. There's no need to suffer in silence.
Exactly. And on that note, it's also helpful to remember that work is just one part of life. It's important to have things outside of work that bring you joy and help you relax. Whether that's spending time with family, doing a hobby you love, or even just relaxing with a good book or movie, those things matter too.
Yes, finding balance is so important. Work is a big part of our lives, but it's not the only part. Making time for the things that make you happy and fulfilled outside of work can help put things in perspective and reduce stress. It's all about finding that balance that works for you.
Exactly. Balance is the key word. When you can find that sweet spot between work and personal time, everything feels a lot more manageable. And remember, it's okay if it takes time to figure out what that balance looks like for you. It's different for everyone, and that's okay.
That's such a good point. We're all on our own path when it comes to managing stress and finding balance. It's a learning process, and there's no right way to do it. What's important is that we keep checking in with ourselves and making adjustments when we need to.
Right, it's a journey, not a destination. And I think the most important takeaway here is that stress at work is normal, but it doesn't have to control your life. There are so many ways to manage it, whether it's through small changes in your routine, finding support, or even just recognizing when it's time to take a step back.
Exactly. Stress is a part of work life, but it doesn't have to define it. With the right tools and mindset, we can manage it in healthy ways and keep ourselves in a good place, both mentally and physically.
I couldn't agree more. And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully, for those listening, you've picked up some helpful tips and ideas on how to manage stress at work. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Yes, Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope this conversation has been helpful and that you found some strategies you can apply to your own work life. Stress is tough, but with the right approach, it's something we can all manage.
Exactly. And don't forget, it's okay to take things one step at a time. No one expects you to have it all figured out overnight. Be kind to yourself along the way.
Yes, take care of yourselves. Everyone, thank you for listening, and we really appreciate you being part of this conversation.
It's been a great chat. Take care, and until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.